Today, I want to comment on the recent election in Israel and the Obama administration's outrageous reaction to it. 2 days ago, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party won a decisive victory in the Israeli election. For myself, and on behalf of 3 million Arkansans, I want to offer hearty congratulations to Prime Minister Netanyahu. I have the greatest admiration for the Prime Minister's visionary and courageous statesmanship, as well as his service as a young man in his country's elite special operations forces. Prime Minister Netanyahu and his family have paid the highest price over the decades in the fight against the common enemies of Israel and the United States. Yet, let me also stress that the alliance between the United States and Israel is not an alliance between this and that Israeli statesman, nor this or that Israeli political party, nor, for that matter, does the alliance depend on whom or which party controls the White House or the Congress. Rather, it's an alliance between the American people and the Israeli people, between the ultimate defender of the West and the easternmost frontier of the West. Our alliance rests on our shared experiences and principles, our Judeo-Christian heritage, respect for the natural rights of mankind, democratic self-government, market-based economics, and strong provision for our common defense. Israel's commitment to democratic elections demonstrated just this week is an important distinction from many of their neighbors and why they are our closest ally in the region. Apparently, President Obama harbors such deep-seated and irrational antipathy for Prime Minister Netanyahu, though, that he's now willing to upend this decades-long alliance. President Obama's antagonism towards Prime Minister Netanyahu is long-standing and well-known. Last year, for example, anonymous administration officials used a vulgar epithet to question Prime Minister Netanyahu's courage. And I'll point out as an aside that anonymity is the Washington coward's shield. Just as I also am compelled to point out, so far as I know, neither the president nor his senior political aides served in our country's elite special operations forces, unlike Prime Minister Netanyahu. But back to my main point. In the last 48 hours, more anonymous administration officials have suggested a fundamental rethinking of the U.S. Israel Alliance, citing Prime Minister Netanyahu's simple restatement of the fact that there can be no Palestinian state until conditions change. The Palestinian Authority must, at a minimum, eject Hamas from its governing coalition, reclaim control of the Gaza Strip, accept a demilitarized eastern border in Judea and Samaria, and recognize Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. As Prime Minister Netanyahu said, if the Palestinians lay down their arms, there will be peace. But if Israel lays down its arms, there will be no Israel. The Obama administration, though, has gone off the deep end and let their personal bitterness toward the Israeli Prime Minister drive their public foreign policy toward our closest ally. Here are just a few quotes from administration officials suggesting a fundamental change in our relationship with Israel and a willingness to abandon Israel at the United Nations. One official said, "We are signaling that if the Israeli government's position is no longer to pursue a Palestinian state, we're going to have to broaden the spectrum of options we pursue going forward." According to reports, that same official said that he wouldn't rule out a modified American posture at the United Nations, where the U.S. has long fended off resolutions criticizing Israeli settlement activities and demanding its withdrawal from Palestinian territories. Another senior White House official said, "The premise of our position internationally has been to support direct negotiations between the Israelis and Palestinians. We are now in a reality where the Israeli government no longer supports direct negotiations. Therefore, we clearly have to factor that into our decisions going forward." Finally, State Department spokeswoman Jen Psaki said, "We are currently evaluating our approach. We're not going to prejudge what we would do if there was UN action." Some observers will dismiss these comments as the petulant response of a president and political operatives who didn't get their way in elections this week. But there is something much more worrisome underway. While Prime Minister Netanyahu won a decisive victory, he still has just started assembling a governing majority coalition. These kinds of quotes from Israel's most important ally could very well startle some of the smaller parties and their leaders with whom Prime Minister Netanyahu is currently in negotiations. This raises the question, of course, the administration intends to undermine Prime Minister Netanyahu's efforts to assemble a coalition by suggesting a change to our long-standing policy of supporting Israel's position with the United Nations. After all, if you were an elected leader in Israel's parliament, you surely would worry about the United States refusing to exercise its veto at the UN Security Council. Consider the UN's long and dark history of anti-Semitism. The UN Human Rights Council has condemned Israel in 45 resolutions since its creation in 2006. In 2013, the UN General Assembly adopted a total of 21 resolutions singling out Israel for disapproval, and just 4 resolutions for the rest of the world. 50% of all emergency special sessions of the General Assembly over the last 6 decades were convened to denounce Israel. Meanwhile, no emergency special session has been called for any other state in over 30 years. Given this history and the stakes here and abroad, let me speak bluntly so there can be no misunderstanding. Under no circumstances will I or this Congress allow the Obama administration to abandon Israel to the United Nations or any other international institution, or to change fundamentally the terms of our alliance with Israel. This administration's latest outrageous pronouncement is even more difficult to understand as they simultaneously coddle the terrorist regime in Iran. The people of Israel should know that the American people remain in solidarity with them in their quest to exist peacefully with their neighbors, and that we will not allow them to be thrown to the jackals at the United Nations, a characterization made famous by a past member of this body, the late Daniel Patrick Moynihan. I call on all members of this body, including my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, to join me in one voice supporting our ally Israel against the jackals. In the coming days, perhaps as soon as the debate over the budget resolution next week, I will propose legislation that reaffirms the long-standing policy of the United States to continue to defend Israel against attacks at the United Nations and other international agencies. I urge all members of this body, including my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, who have a long history of supporting Israel, to join me in supporting such legislation. Further, should the United Nations, its subordinate agencies, the International Criminal Court, or any other international agency take adverse action against Israel, I will consider introducing legislation to restrict U.S. funding for the offending agency. Finally, if the United States ambassador to the United Nations does not exercise the American veto in the Security Council against any anti-Israel resolution, I will also consider introducing similar legislation to restrict funding to the ambassador's office. Mr. President, for decades, the relationship between Israel and the United States has transcended political and personal differences. Our shared interests were enough to overcome any ideology or personal disagreement. But I fear that mutual respect is of little concern to this administration. The President and all those senior officials around him should carefully consider the diplomatic and security consequences of their words. This Congress certainly will.